Welcome back. One of the reasons for the sharp increase in migrations from Latin America and the Caribbean countries in recent years is the lack of economic opportunity. Once those migrating settle in a new location and find employment, they often send money to their relatives back home. These money transfers are known as remittances. And for countries in Latin America, they can amount to billions of dollars each year. Here to talk more about these remittances and their influence on Latin America and the Caribbean is our political analyst, Laura Carlsen. Laura, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Elaine.
So what countries in Latin America receive the most in remittances?
Mexico is definitely at the top of the list, and this isn't surprising because there are 36 million people of Mexican or Mexican descent, about 11 million Mexican migrants in the United States being the country where they have the most earning power. So that figure comes to about $28 billion a year for Mexico, and it's actually a higher source of income for the country than oil, which it's famous for. And overall in the Latin American region, it's about $74 billion. Now, after that, you have Guatemala, Dominican Republic, and Colombia, but all of those are kind of a distant second with numbers below double digit.
So billions and billions of dollars, how are they making their way through? Is the money being transferred by wire? Is it being mailed? Are there bank accounts in each country? What is the most common way to get your money to loved ones?
The most common way is really by transfers, like Western Union, which has a significant niche in this remittance sending. And it's been a problem all the way along because there have been accusations that the intermediaries are taking unfair shares. There have been accusations that this can create a cover for money laundering. In fact, Western Union was just slapped with like $185 million fine for not flagging certain transfers that should have looked suspicious to them and not doing the proper reporting. So it's a problem, and it's also a problem because those intermediaries and this particular form of transfer is taking a big cut out of the very little money that's going basically from the poor in the United States, who are relatively better off than the poor who are their families in the home countries.
So how vital is the money for the people receiving it from their relatives abroad? I mean, how much of a part does it play in their day-to-day life?
Well, it's absolutely essential. Most of this money we know in all the countries in Latin America is going towards survival. Most of it's being spent on consumer goods. Some of it's being spent on constructing your own home. You know, this is not going into savings or even longer term plans. It's really a subsidy for poverty. And that's kind of another problem about this model, this globalized model, because essentially the remittances are doing the job that the government should be doing, of making sure that the poor in their own country have a source of livelihood and are able to eradicate poverty through public policy.
You mentioned some of the issues surrounding the money transfer services out there, but what are some of the other downsides to remittances?
Well, some of the things that I've mentioned, that on the one hand, the fact that you have policies within these home countries, or situations in general within these home countries, where family members are virtually expelled to go to another country in order to make a living. So what happens there is that families are divided. It's often not their choice to have to go to the United States and work there, many times without papers, in an extremely vulnerable situation, particularly now, and not be with their families and then send this money home. And for the families receiving it as well, they would much prefer that their loved ones were with them and they were able to make a decent living where they are. It also does get into that realm of illicit financial flows that are very difficult to combat because they can serve as a cover for that occasionally. And it turns out to be also a form of income to the government, which is sustaining governments, but in a way that comes at a huge human cost.
So how is that money tracked? You know, we were talking about the billions of dollars, but it is cycling back through the economy. How are they keeping track of the money, and is it taxed?
It can be taxed in two ways, and is taxed in two ways. It can be reported as income, and tax through that, and then also through sales tax, because as I said, most of the people are taking this money and going straight out and buying what they need, and there's a fairly high sales tax in Mexico, for example, so there's taxes through that. In general, the problem has been, too, that since this money is basically just survival money and going to consumer goods, then it's a huge quantity of money that's not going into creating more productive projects in the communities that would enable families to stay together and to lift more entire communities out of poverty. There have been attempts made to collectivize remittances, to use them on a community level, to have matching funds come in from governments. But the results have been mixed, and they haven't been entirely successful. So it still continues on this family-to-family level, where it can't become, even though it's a large amount of money, a real motor for economic progress.
And for those in the United States trying to make a way, have fears of more deportations had any kind of impact on the amount of remittances sent back, and are the families in the other countries trying to figure out another way to make more money?
Absolutely. A lot of the rise that we see now in remittances is fear-driven, what's coming from the United States to our region. Because if you look at it worldwide, remittances have actually gone down lately because economies are worse off, a series of reasons, and yet that's not true in Latin America. So you have this situation that's counterintuitive, where there's a net zero flow of Mexican migrants to the United States, and fewer people going over, and more money coming back. Fewer workers, yet more money coming back. And that's happening because families are making a decision to say, I could be deported at any time. I could be forced to return because of the situation here. We're going to have to get some funds distributed and figure out other ways to do this. And I think that's really behind the rise we're seeing, particularly between the United States and Mexico.
All right, we'll leave it there. Laura Carlsen, thank you so much for joining us on America's Now.